A Werewolf Romance Audiobook written by Obsidian Romance. The iron shackles bit into Lyra's wrists as she stood on the weathered platform, her bare feet cold against the splintered wood. Around her, voices rose and fell like vultures circling prey, cruel laughter, dismissive grunts, the clink of coin purses being weighed and found wanting. "Look at this one," sneered a man with rotting teeth and breath that reeked of stale ale. "Skin and bones. What use is she?" Lyra kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, where storm clouds gathered like omens. She'd learned long ago that showing fear only made them crueler. The slave trader's whip had taught her that lesson well. 20 silver pieces," called out a voice from the crowd. 15, countered another. "She looks half dead already." The auctioneer, a greasy man with gold teeth, shook his head in disgust. "Come now, gentlemen. This one's got healer's hands, see the calluses from herb grinding? Surely she's worth more than livestock." But the crowd was already losing interest. Lyra had watched 3 other girls sell before her, each one younger, prettier, more valuable. She was 23, ancient by slave standards, with tangled auburn hair that hadn't seen a proper washing in months and clothes that were little more than rags. 10 silver, came a bored voice. "Final offer." The auctioneer raised his gavel, resignation clear in his weathered features. 10 silver pieces, going once. 1,000 gold. The words cut through the marketplace noise like a blade through silk. Every head turned toward the back of the crowd, where a figure emerged from the shadows between 2 merchant stalls. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. The man was tall, impossibly tall, with shoulders that seemed to block out the sun itself. Dark hair fell in waves to his collar, and his face was carved from stone and starlight, all sharp angles and predatory grace. But it was his eyes that made her knees weak. Golden. Not brown or amber, but pure molten gold that seemed to burn with an inner fire. He moved through the crowd like death walking, and people scattered from his path without conscious thought, some primitive instinct warning them that this was a predator unlike any other. "Did you say 1,000? The auctioneer's voice cracked. The stranger's gaze never left Lyra's face as he reached into his leather coat and withdrew a pouch that clinked heavy with coin. "Gold. Not silver." He tossed it to the auctioneer without looking away from her. "And I'll kill any man who thinks to bid against me." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, delivered with the casual certainty of someone stating the weather. The marketplace fell silent. Lyra stared into those golden eyes and felt something stir deep in her chest, something that had been buried so long she'd forgotten it existed. Hope. But there was something else in his gaze, something wild and dangerous that made her pulse quicken for reasons she couldn't name. The stranger stepped onto the platform, moving with fluid grace that reminded her of hunting wolves she'd glimpsed in the forests of her childhood. Up close, she could see the intricate silver embroidery on his black coat, the way his clothes were cut to accommodate muscles that spoke of countless battles won. "What's your name, little healer?" His voice was velvet over steel, accented with something she couldn't place. "Lyra," she whispered, surprised she could speak at all. He reached toward her shackles, and she flinched instinctively. His hand paused inches from her wrist, and something flickered across his features, anger, but not at her. "I'm going to remove these," he said softly. "They'll never touch you again." The shackles fell away with a sound like breaking chains, and Lyra rubbed her raw wrists, hardly daring to believe it was real. Freedom. After 7 years of bondage, could it truly be this simple? "Thank you," she breathed. "I don't know how to repay." "You can't." His golden eyes held secrets she couldn't fathom. "Because what I'm taking you to will be far more dangerous than anything you've faced here." Before she could ask what he meant, he swept his cloak around her shoulders, enveloping her in warmth and the scent of pine forests and mountain storms. The crowd parted before them like water, fear and respect warring in every face they passed. As they reached the edge of the marketplace, Lyra glanced back once at the auction block that had nearly been her doom. When she turned forward again, the stranger was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "My name is Kieran Blackthorne," he said, his voice carrying an authority that spoke of command, of absolute power. "And you, little healer, belong to me now." The words should have terrified her. Instead, they sent a thrill down her spine that she didn't understand. But as they walked toward a line of black horses that stamped and snorted like creatures from legend itself, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking not toward salvation, but toward a destiny that would either destroy her completely or forge her into something she'd never imagined possible. And then she saw him smile, a predator's smile that promised both protection and peril in equal measure, and she realized with crystalline clarity that her real story was just beginning. Chapter 1. The journey to Kieran's lands took 3 days of hard riding through terrain that grew wilder with each passing mile. Lyra clung to the saddle of her gentle mare, grateful for the beast's steady temperament as they climbed treacherous mountain passes and forded streams that ran swift and cold with snowmelt. Kieran rode ahead on a massive black stallion that seemed to share its master's predatory nature, leading a small company of men who watched the surrounding forests with eyes that missed nothing. They spoke little during the day, but at night around their campfires, Lyra caught fragments of conversation that made no sense, talk of pack business and territorial disputes and something called the moon's call. On the second night, as she sat wrapped in Kieran's cloak by the dying embers, she worked up the courage to ask the question that had been burning in her mind since the marketplace. "Why did you buy me?" Kieran looked up from sharpening a blade that seemed too large to be practical, more like a sword than a knife, though he handled it with casual familiarity. "You're a healer. So are many others. One's younger, prettier, more skilled. Are you?" His golden eyes reflected the firelight as they fixed on hers. "More skilled than others, I mean." Lyra hesitated. The truth was complicated, dangerous in ways she'd learned to fear. I have a gift. For healing. Sometimes I can do things that others can't." "Such as?" The weight of his attention made her nervous, but something in his expression, interest rather than greed, encouraged her to continue. "I can heal things that should be beyond healing. Mortal wounds. Poison that's already taken hold. Even." She swallowed hard. "Even things that others would call impossible." Kieran's blade paused in its rhythmic sharpening. "Show me." Before she could protest, he drew the edge across his palm. Blood welled immediately, dark and thick in the firelight. Lyra gasped and reached for him instinctively, her hands closing over his wounded one. The familiar warmth flowed through her, that strange sensation that started in her chest and radiated down through her arms. Light, soft and golden, emanated from her palms where they touched his skin. The cut sealed itself as if it had never existed, leaving only smooth, unblemished flesh. When she looked up, Kieran was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Impossible," she whispered, echoing what every healer who'd witnessed her gift had said. "That's what they all call it." "Not impossible," Kieran said quietly. "Just rare. Rarer than you know." Something in his tone made her shiver. "What do you mean?" But he'd already turned away, dismissing the subject with the finality of a man accustomed to command. "We reach my lands tomorrow. You should sleep." Sleep, however, proved elusive. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt golden ones watching her from the darkness. The next morning brought their first glimpse of Kieran's home, a fortress that rose from the mountainside like something from legend. Black stone walls climbed toward towers that seemed to scrape the sky, and everywhere she looked, wolf motifs decorated the architecture. Stone wolves snarled from the battlements, wolf heads adorned the gates, and banners bearing a silver wolf on a black field snapped in the mountain wind. "Welcome to Shadowmere," Kieran said as they approached the massive gates. "Your new home." The word home should have warmed her. Instead, it sent ice through her veins as she noticed the way the guards watched them approach, not with welcome, but with something closer to hunger. The gates opened with a grinding of ancient mechanisms, revealing a courtyard filled with people who emerged from buildings and doorways to see the Lord's return. But these weren't ordinary castle folk. There was something different about them, something that made Lyra's instincts scream warnings she didn't understand. They were all tall, stronger looking than normal people, with an intensity in their eyes that reminded her uncomfortably of wolves she'd seen stalking prey. And they were staring at her with an interest that made her skin crawl. "Is that her?" A woman with silver-streaked hair pushed through the crowd, her pale eyes fixed on Lyra with open hostility. "The human you've brought among us?" Human. The way she said it made it sound like a curse word. "Careful, Meredith," Kieran's voice carried a warning that made several people step back. "She's under my protection." Protection? The woman, Meredith, laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You bring a weak human into our pack and call it protection? She'll be dead within a week." "She's not weak." Kieran dismounted and moved to help Lyra down, his hands warm and steady on her waist. "And she's not going anywhere." But as he spoke, Lyra caught sight of another figure moving through the crowd, an older man with graying temples and eyes like chips of winter ice. Unlike the others, he didn't stare at her with hostility or hunger. He watched her with something far more dangerous. Calculation. When their gazes met, he smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes, and inclined his head in what might have been respect or mockery. "Welcome, child," he said, his voice cultured and smooth as poisoned honey. "I am Marcus Draven, advisor to our lord and keeper of our oldest traditions. I have such plans for you." The way he said plans made every instinct Lyra possessed scream in warning. This man was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with physical strength and everything to do with a mind that saw people as pieces on a game board. Kieran's hand tightened protectively on her shoulder. "Lyra will be given time to settle in before any introductions to our ways." "Of course," Marcus agreed easily. "All the time she needs. After all." His smile widened, showing teeth that seemed too sharp in the torchlight. Where could she possibly run to, even if she wanted to? It was then that Lyra noticed the gates closing behind them with a finality that sounded like a tomb sealing shut. And as Marcus Draven's cold eyes fixed on hers with predatory interest, she realized with growing horror that she might have escaped one form of slavery only to walk willingly into something infinitely worse. Chapter 2. Lyra's chambers were luxurious beyond anything she'd ever imagined, a tower room with windows that looked out over the mountain valleys, furnished with tapestries that must have cost more than most people saw in a lifetime. A fire crackled warmly in the hearth, and clothes had been laid out for her, simple but well-made, in deep blues and grays that complemented her auburn hair. It was a gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. She tried the door after the servant left. Locked from the outside. The windows were too high for escape, and even if they weren't, the mountain wilderness beyond would kill her more surely than any prison. A soft knock interrupted her brooding. "Come in," she called, expecting the servant returning with the evening meal. Instead, Kieran entered, carrying a tray himself. He changed from his traveling clothes into a simple white shirt and dark pants that somehow made him seem more approachable, though no less dangerous. "You didn't eat," he observed, setting the fresh tray on a small table near the fire. Elena was concerned. "Elena? The servant who brought your dinner. She's one of the few who..." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "She's one of the few who understands what it's like to be different here." Lyra moved closer to the fire, wrapping her arms around herself. "Different how?" Kieran's golden eyes studied her face in the flickering light. "How much do you know about where you are, Lyra? About what we are? I know you're not ordinary people." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. There's something about all of you, something that makes my instincts scream warnings I don't understand. And that man, Marcus. What about Marcus? Kieran's voice sharpened. He looks at me like I'm something to be used. Like a tool he's planning to pick up when the time is right. She shivered despite the fire's warmth. Who is he, really? My father's oldest friend. My advisor. And... Kieran moved to stoke the fire, his movements restless. Someone who believes very strongly in the old ways. The harsh ways. What old ways? For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw a struggle between truth and protection. We are wolves, Lyra. Not just in spirit or temperament. We are shapeshifters, creatures who can take the form of our wolf selves when the moon calls to us. This fortress, this pack, we are werewolves. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Lyra stared at him, waiting for the punchline, the moment when he'd reveal it was some elaborate jest. It didn't come. Instead, she found herself thinking of all the small details that had nagged at her, the way everyone moved with predatory grace, the intensity of their stares, the wolf motifs everywhere, the way they'd spoken of pack business during the journey. That's impossible, she whispered, but even as she said it, she was remembering her own impossible gift and the way Kieran had called it rare rather than miraculous. Is it? Kieran stepped closer, and she caught his scent, pine in mountain storms and something wild that made her pulse quicken. You can heal mortal wounds with a touch. You can bring people back from the edge of death with nothing but will and light. Is my truth really more impossible than yours? She wanted to deny it, to cling to the rational world she'd always known. But that world had never made room for her gift either, had never explained why she could do things that others couldn't. Show me, she heard herself say. Kieran's eyebrows rose. Are you certain? No, she wasn't certain of anything anymore. But she nodded anyway. He moved to the center of the room, closing his eyes and taking a deep breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his body began to change. It wasn't the violent, painful transformation she'd seen in minstrel tales and frightening stories. This was fluid, graceful, like watching water take a new shape. His form rippled and shifted, bones restructuring, muscles realigning, until where Kieran had stood now crouched a massive wolf with midnight black fur and eyes like molten gold. Lyra's breath caught. The wolf was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, easily twice the size of any natural wolf she'd ever seen. He watched her with intelligence that was unmistakably human, unmistakably Kieran. Slowly, carefully, she extended her hand. The wolf sniffed her fingers, then allowed her to touch the thick fur between his ears. It was softer than silk and warm with life. You're magnificent, she whispered. The transformation back was as smooth as the first, and suddenly Kieran stood before her again, human but somehow more than human, carrying the wild grace of his wolf form in every movement. Now you know, he said quietly. Now you understand why I needed you. I don't understand anything, Lyra admitted. Why did you need me? Why bring a human healer to a pack of wolves? Kieran's expression darkened. Because we're dying, Lyra. Our kind, our pack, we're losing a war we've fought for centuries. Silver weapons wound us in ways we cannot heal from. Wolfsbane poison lingers in our systems. And our enemies have learned to make weapons specifically designed to kill our kind. He moved to the window, staring out at the mountain peaks. Normal healers can't help us. Their medicines don't work on our physiology, their methods fail when faced with supernatural wounds. But you... He turned back to her, hope and desperation warring in his golden eyes. Your gift transcends the normal boundaries. You could save us. The weight of what he was asking settled on her shoulders like a mantle she wasn't sure she was strong enough to bear. And if I can't? If my gift isn't enough? Then we die, Kieran said simply. All of us. And the humans we've spent centuries protecting from darker things than us die with us. Before she could ask what he meant by darker things, a commotion erupted in the courtyard below. Shouts, running footsteps, the sound of something heavy being dragged across stone. Kieran was at the window instantly, his entire body going rigid. No, he breathed. Not now. What is it? Patrol coming in. They're carrying wounded. He was already moving toward the door. Lyra, I need you to. I'll help, she said without hesitation. Whatever they need. But as they rushed down the stone stairs toward the courtyard, Marcus Draven's cold voice echoed from below, "Bring her down here. Let's see what the human can really do when our strongest warrior is dying and there's no time for gentle practice." Through the window, Lyra caught a glimpse of men carrying someone on a makeshift stretcher, dark stains spreading across the fabric that covered the still form. And she realized with crystalline clarity that this wasn't going to be a gentle introduction to her new role. This was going to be a trial by fire, with a life hanging in the balance and an entire pack watching to see if the human girl their lord had bought could truly save them. Or if she was just another weakness that would get them all killed. Chapter 3. The courtyard was chaos incarnate when Lyra and Kieran burst through the main doors. Torches blazed against the night, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls as pack members gathered in a tight circle around the wounded warrior. The metallic scent of blood hung heavy in the air, mixed with something else, something acrid and wrong that made Lyra's nose burn. "Move aside," Kieran commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority of an alpha. The crowd parted instantly, revealing the injured man on the makeshift stretcher. Lyra's breath caught. The warrior was massive even by pack standards, with dark hair matted with sweat and blood. But it wasn't his size that made her stomach clench, it was the wounds. 3 parallel gashes ran from his shoulder to his ribs, deep enough to reveal bone, and they gleamed with an oily, silver substance that seemed to eat at the flesh around it. "Wolfsbane-laced silver claws," said a woman kneeling beside the stretcher, a healer, Lyra realized, noting the herb-stained apron and the hopeless expression in her eyes. "The wounds won't close. I've tried everything, but the poison keeps spreading." As if to prove her point, the warrior convulsed, his back arching as a scream tore from his throat. When he fell back, Lyra could see that the silver trails had spread further along his ribs. "He's dying," Marcus Draven's voice cut through the crowd like a blade. "Our strongest warrior, brought down by our enemy's newest weapon. Unless, of course." His cold eyes fixed on Lyra with predatory intensity. "Our new healer thinks she can succeed where our own have failed." It was a challenge, a trap, and a test all rolled into one. Every face in the courtyard turned toward her, some hopeful, others skeptical, all waiting to see if the human girl could prove herself worthy of their lord's protection. Lyra stepped forward, her legs steadier than she felt. "What's his name?" "Gareth," Kieran said quietly. "He's been my second in command for 5 years. A good man. A loyal friend." The warrior, Gareth, opened pain-glazed eyes at the sound of his name. When he saw Lyra approaching, he managed a weak smile. "The famous healer," he rasped. "Come to save the savage wolves?" "Come to save a brave man," she corrected, kneeling beside the stretcher. Up close, the wounds were even worse than she thought. The flesh around them was turning black, and she could see the poison working its way toward his heart with each labored beat. "I've never seen wounds like these," she admitted, looking up at the pack healer. "What exactly does wolfsbane do to your kind?" "It's our greatest weakness," the woman replied. "In small amounts, it causes weakness and fever. In large amounts..." She gestured helplessly at Gareth. "It prevents our natural healing abilities from working." Combined with silver, it creates a poison that spreads through our systems like liquid fire. Lyra studied the wounds, her mind racing. She'd healed poison before, but never anything this aggressive, never anything that seemed to actively fight against her gift. But Gareth was dying, and she was his only hope. "I need clean water, fresh bandages, and space to work," she said with more confidence than she felt. "Everyone else needs to step back." "You're not strong enough," Marcus said flatly. "Look at you, barely more than a child, and human besides. When you fail, his death will be on Kieran's hands for bringing false hope among us." The word stung because part of her feared he was right. But Gareth's labored breathing was growing weaker, and she could see his life force flickering like a candle in the wind. "Maybe I'll fail," she said, meeting Marcus's gaze steadily. "But I'm going to try. And if you keep distracting me with your doubts, you might just get your wish." A surprised murmur ran through the crowd. No one spoke to Marcus Draven that way, certainly not a human girl who'd been here less than a day. But Kieran's hand settled on her shoulder, warm and reassuring. "Do what you need to do," he said quietly. "I'll handle Marcus." Lyra placed her hands over the worst of the wounds, feeling the familiar warmth building in her chest. But the moment her skin touched the poisoned flesh, pain lanced through her like lightning. The wolfsbane fought her gift, turning her healing energy back on itself until she cried out and jerked her hands away. "As I expected," Marcus said with satisfaction. "The human's parlor tricks are useless against real supernatural." "Shut up," Lyra snapped, her fear transforming into anger. She'd spent years being told her gift was impossible, worthless, dangerous. She wasn't about to let this man's doubts kill someone she could save. This time when she placed her hands on Gareth's wounds, she was ready for the fight. The wolfsbane poison surged against her healing light like acid, trying to corrupt it, turn it against itself. But Lyra pushed back, pouring more power into her gift than she'd ever attempted before. Light blazed from her palms, not the soft golden glow she was used to, but brilliant silver-white radiance that made the torches pale in comparison. The crowd gasped and stepped back, but Lyra barely heard them. All her attention was focused on the battle raging beneath her hands. The poison fought like a living thing, writhing and burning as her power purged it from Gareth's system. She could feel it trying to jump to her, to corrupt her gift at its source, but she held firm, drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. Slowly, impossibly, the wounds began to close. The blackened flesh turned healthy pink, the silver traces dissolved, and Gareth's breathing steadied into the deep, regular rhythm of natural sleep. When it was over, Lyra swayed on her knees, exhausted beyond measure. She'd never channeled that much power before, had never fought something that actively resisted her gift. But Gareth was alive, whole, sleeping peacefully with no trace of the wounds that had been killing him. The courtyard was silent as a tomb. Then Kieran was beside her, his strong arms lifting her to her feet as the pack erupted in amazed chatter. Some were staring at her with something approaching awe, others with fear, all with a new respect that hadn't been there before. "Impossible," the pack healer whispered, kneeling beside Gareth to check his pulse. "The wounds are completely gone. Not even a scar. I've never seen anything like it." "Neither have I," Marcus said quietly, and when Lyra looked at him, she saw something new in his cold eyes. Not respect, something far more dangerous. Hunger. "Tell me, child, do you have any idea what you've just done?" Before she could answer, Gareth stirred on the stretcher, his eyes opening clear and alert. When he saw the faces staring down at him, he sat up with the fluid grace of someone who'd never been injured at all. "What happened?" he asked, running his hands over his chest where the wounds had been. "The last thing I remember was the attack, the pain." His eyes found Lyra and widened. "You healed me. You actually healed wolfsbane poisoning. Is that significant?" Lyra asked, though the way everyone was looking at her suggested she already knew the answer. Significant? Gareth laughed, a sound of pure joy. Lady, wolfsbane poisoning has been a death sentence for our kind since the beginning of time. What you just did, it changes everything. The crowd pressed closer, hope blazing in faces that had been resigned to despair moments before. But it was Kieran's expression that caught Lyra's attention, gratitude and amazement warring with something that looked almost like fear. This changes the war, someone called out. If she can heal wolfsbane poisoning. If she can heal our warriors instead of losing them to enemy weapons. We could finally fight back. Enough, Kieran's voice cut through the excited babble. Lyra needs rest. There will be time to discuss implications tomorrow. But as he led her toward the keep, his arm protectively around her waist, Lyra caught sight of Marcus Draven speaking in urgent whispers to a small group of older pack members. Their faces were intent, calculating, and every so often one of them would glance in her direction with an expression that made her skin crawl. Kieran, she said quietly as they climbed the stairs to her tower room. I think I've just made things worse instead of better. What do you mean? The way Marcus is looking at me. The way some of the others are looking at me. It's not gratitude, it's greed. They're not seeing a person who helped them. They're seeing a weapon they can use. Kieran's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. You're under my protection. No one will force you to do anything you don't want to do. But even as he said it, they both knew the truth. She'd just proven herself invaluable to a pack at war, had demonstrated an ability that could turn the tide of a centuries-old conflict. And men like Marcus Draven didn't let weapons like that slip through their fingers. When they reached her door, Kieran turned to face her, his golden eyes intense in the torchlight. Lyra, I need you to know, what you did tonight, it was incredible. Brave. You saved a good man's life, and you gave my people hope they haven't felt in years. But? He was quiet for a long moment. But it also painted a target on your back. There are those in this pack who believe that individual choice matters less than pack survival. And after tonight, he ran a hand through his dark hair. Just be careful who you trust. Not everyone here has your best interests at heart. It was a warning, and they both knew it. But it was also an admission of something Lyra had already begun to suspect, that even Kieran, for all his power as Alpha, might not be able to protect her from the forces her gift had just unleashed. As she settled into her chambers for the night, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that saving Gareth's life had been the easy part. The hard part, surviving the consequences, was just beginning. She was still pondering this when a soft knock came at her door. Expecting Elena with a late meal, she opened it without thinking. Marcus Draven stood in the hallway, his cold smile gleaming in the torchlight. Forgive the late hour, he said, stepping into her room without invitation. But we need to talk about your future here. About the role you're going to play in our pack's survival. The way he said it made it clear that refusing wasn't an option. And as the door closed behind him with a soft click, Lyra realized that her real trials were about to begin. Chapter 4. Please, sit, Marcus said, gesturing to the chair by the fire as if this were his room instead of hers. We have much to discuss, and I prefer civilized conversation to alternative methods of persuasion. The threat in his words was subtle but unmistakable. Lyra remained standing, wrapping Kieran's cloak more tightly around her shoulders. It's late. Whatever you want to discuss can wait until morning. Can it? Marcus moved to the window, gazing out at the mountain peaks. Tell me, child, what do you know of our war? Only what Kieran told me. That your people are dying from weapons designed to kill your kind. A gross oversimplification, but accurate enough. Marcus turned back to her, his pale eyes reflecting the firelight like chips of ice. What he didn't tell you is that we're losing. Badly. In the past year alone, we've lost more than half our warriors to these new weapons. At the current rate, this pack will be extinct within 2 years. The words hit Lyra like physical blows. Extinct? Completely wiped out. Men, women, children, all dead. Marcus's voice remained conversational, as if he were discussing the weather. Unless, of course, we acquire an advantage our enemies don't expect. Understanding dawned, cold and terrible. You want to use me as a weapon. I want to use you to save our people, Marcus corrected. Tonight you proved that wolfsbane poisoning, our race's greatest weakness, means nothing to your gift. Do you have any idea what that means strategically? That your warriors won't die from poisoned weapons. More than that. It means we can take risks we never dared before. Send strike teams into enemy territory knowing that if they're wounded, you can heal them. Launch attacks that would have been suicide missions because our people couldn't recover from the inevitable injuries. His eyes gleamed with a fervor that made Lyra's skin crawl. It means we can finally fight back instead of simply trying to survive. Lyra moved closer to the fire, kneading its warmth against the chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. And what if I refuse? What if I don't want to be part of your war? Marcus's smile was colder than winter. Then you condemn every man, woman, and child in this pack to death. Is that really what you want? The weight of his words settled on her shoulders like a lead blanket. You're asking me to help you kill people. I'm asking you to help us defend ourselves against those who would murder us all simply for being what we are. Marcus stepped closer, his voice taking on an edge of passion. These aren't honorable enemies, child. They torture our captured warriors with silver knives before killing them. They've slaughtered entire packs, including the cubs. They burn our dead rather than allowing them proper rites. Despite herself, Lyra felt horror at the images his words conjured. Why? Why do they hate your people so much? Because we exist. Because we're stronger, faster, more than human. Because some humans would rather destroy what they don't understand than learn to coexist with it. Marcus's expression hardened. They've been hunting our kind for centuries, but recently they've organized, armed themselves with weapons specifically designed to kill us. This isn't about territory or resources, it's about genocide. The fire popped and crackled in the silence that followed. Lyra found herself thinking of the pack members she'd met, Elena the servant who'd been kind to her, Gareth who'd smiled even while dying, the children she'd glimpsed playing in the courtyard. The thought of them being systematically hunted and killed made her stomach turn. Even if I agree to help, she said slowly, there are limits to what I can do. I'm one person. I can't be everywhere at once, can't heal everyone who needs it. No, but you can train others. Teach them your techniques, show them how to channel healing energy the way you do. Marcus moved to the table where her untouched dinner still sat, picking up an apple and turning it over in his hands. With proper instruction, some of our people might be able to develop similar abilities. I don't know how to train anyone. I don't even fully understand my own gift. Then you'll learn. We have texts, ancient knowledge about the mystical arts that your people have forgotten. With study and practice, you could become far more than just a healer. His eyes fixed on hers with unsettling intensity. You could become the weapon that saves us all. The word weapon made Lyra flinch. I won't be turned into an instrument of war. Won't you? Marcus set the apple down with deliberate care. Let me paint you a picture of your future here, child. Tomorrow, word of your miraculous healing will spread throughout the pack. By the end of the week, it will have reached our allies in neighboring territories. Within a month, every werewolf pack on the continent will know of the human girl who can heal wolfsbane poisoning. He began to pace, his movements predatory despite his cultured appearance. They'll come to you. Desperate parents carrying dying children. Warriors crippled by enemy weapons. Entire packs on the verge of extinction, begging for your help. Will you turn them away? Will you let children die because you're afraid of being used? The scenarios he painted were too vivid, too plausible. Lyra could already see the faces of those desperate parents, could imagine the weight of their pleas. That's not fair. Fair? Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Nothing about this war is fair. Nothing about what we're fighting for survival against enemies who want to see us wiped from existence. But you have the power to change that. The question is whether you're strong enough to do what needs to be done. Before Lyra could respond, the door burst open. Kieran stood in the doorway, his golden eyes blazing with fury as they fixed on Marcus. Get out, he said quietly, but his voice carried such menace that Lyra instinctively stepped back. Marcus straightened, his mask of civility slipping for just a moment to reveal something much darker underneath. We were having a private conversation. We were having a necessary conversation, Marcus corrected, though he moved toward the door. The girl needs to understand her position here, the role she'll play in our survival. Her role is whatever she chooses it to be, Kieran said, but even as he spoke, Lyra could hear the uncertainty in his voice. They all knew that wasn't entirely true anymore. Marcus paused in the doorway, looking back at Lyra with that calculating expression she'd come to dread. Think about what I've said, child. Think about all the lives that hang in the balance. And remember, neutrality is a luxury we can no longer afford. When he was gone, Kieran closed the door and leaned against it, his whole body radiating tension. What did he want? To recruit me for your war, Lyra said simply. To turn me into a weapon that could tip the balance in your favor. Kieran's jaw tightened. And what did you tell him? That I need time to think. She moved to the window, staring out at the star-filled sky. He painted quite a picture, Kieran. Children dying because I was too selfish to help. Entire packs wiped out because I refused to get involved. Marcus is very good at manipulation, Kieran said carefully. He knows exactly which emotional strings to pull. That doesn't make him wrong, though, does it? Lyra turned to face him, seeing her own doubts reflected in his golden eyes. If I can save lives, if I can help your people survive, don't I have an obligation to do so? Kieran was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with regret. I brought you here to heal, not to fight. I wanted to give you a choice, a chance to use your gift to help rather than being forced into service. But after tonight, everything changed, Lyra finished. I proved I can do something no one else can, and now I'm too valuable to let go. He nodded reluctantly. Marcus isn't entirely wrong about our situation. We are dying out, and we are running out of options. But the thought of turning you into a weapon, of forcing you into a role you never chose. He ran a hand through his dark hair. That's not the man I want to be. It's not the leader I want to be. But it might be the leader your people need. The words hung between them like a challenge. Lyra could see the war playing out in Kieran's expression, his desire to protect her battling against his duty to his pack. There might be another way, he said finally. A compromise that gives you some control over how your gift is used while still helping our people survive. What kind of compromise? Partnership. Not as my healer or Marcus's weapon, but as my equal. Help me lead this pack through the war, help me find a way to protect our people without losing our humanity in the process. His golden eyes met hers, intense and desperate. Help me prove that we can be better than our enemies, that we can fight for survival without becoming monsters ourselves. It was an offer she hadn't expected, one that promised both power and terrible responsibility. "And if I say no? Then I'll do everything in my power to get you safely away from here before Marcus decides to stop asking nicely," Kieran said simply. "But Lyra, if you leave, a lot of good people are going to die. People who could be saved if you stayed." The weight of the choice settled on her shoulders. Stay and become part of a war she'd never asked for, help lead a people she barely understood in a fight for their very survival. Or leave and condemn those same people to death, knowing that her gift might have been the key to their salvation. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance, a sound that spoke of wildness and freedom, but also of pack bonds and loyalty that transcended individual desire. "I need to think," she said finally. "This is too big a decision to make tonight." Kieran nodded, though she could see the disappointment in his eyes. "Of course. But Lyra, don't take too long. Marcus is right about one thing, we're running out of time." As he moved toward the door, she called out softly, "Kieran?" He paused, looking back. "If I stay, if I accept this partnership you're offering, will you be honest with me? About everything? About the war, about your people, about the choices we'll have to make?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Even when the truth is ugly. Even when it's not what you want to hear." After he left, Lyra stood alone by the fire, weighing impossible choices. Outside her window, the moon hung full and silver in the star-filled sky, and she found herself wondering if its light held answers to questions she didn't even know how to ask. She was still standing there when the first scream pierced the night. Then came the sound of running feet, shouted warnings, and something that made her blood freeze in her veins, the hunting howl of wolves that weren't part of Kieran's pack. As alarm bells began to ring throughout the fortress, Lyra realized with crystal clarity that her time for contemplation had just run out. The war had come to Shadowmere. And whether she was ready or not, she was about to discover exactly what Marcus Draven had meant when he said neutrality was a luxury they could no longer afford. Chapter 5. The fortress erupted into chaos as Lyra rushed down the stone steps, her heart hammering against her ribs. Warriors streamed past her in the corridors, some already shifting into their wolf forms, others carrying silver-edged weapons that gleamed deadly in the torchlight. She burst into the courtyard to find it transformed into a battlefield staging ground. Kieran stood at the center, no longer the conflicted man who'd offered her partnership, but every inch the Alpha King, commanding, dangerous, absolutely in control. "South Wall Patrol hasn't reported in," Gareth called out, looking remarkably healthy for someone who'd been dying hours earlier. "Could be a diversion. Or they're already dead," Marcus added grimly, checking the edge on a wicked-looking blade. "The enemy's grown bolder lately. More organized." Kieran's golden eyes found Lyra across the chaos. "You should be in your chambers. It's not safe." His words were cut off by a tremendous crash that shook the very stones beneath their feet. Part of the outer wall exploded inward in a shower of rock and dust, and through the breach poured shapes that made Lyra's blood freeze. They weren't entirely human, but they weren't wolves either. These creatures moved on two legs but hunched forward like beasts, their faces stretched into something between human and canine. Their eyes glowed sickly yellow in the darkness, and silver weapons gleamed in their clawed hands. "Hunters," Marcus spat, and there was more hatred in that single word than Lyra had ever heard in a human voice. "They've learned to take hybrid form. The bastards are using our own nature against us." The battle began with a roar that seemed to shake the mountains themselves. Kieran shifted mid-run, his human form flowing into the massive black wolf Lyra had seen before, and leaped at the nearest hunter with fury that was beautiful and terrible to witness. But even as the pack's warriors threw themselves at the invaders with desperate courage, Lyra could see they were outnumbered. More hunters poured through the breach, and these weren't the clumsy humans with silver weapons she'd expected. These were creatures that moved with inhuman speed and strength, that fought with the savagery of beasts but the intelligence of men. "Lyra! Elena appeared at her side, the servant's face white with terror. "You have to come with me. There are wounded already." A scream cut through the night, high and agonized. One of the pack's young warriors stumbled backward, clutching at his throat where silver claws had opened veins. Blood, too much blood, poured between his fingers. Lyra was moving before conscious thought kicked in, pushing through the chaos toward the wounded boy. He couldn't be more than 16, barely old enough for his first transformation, and his eyes were wide with the knowledge that he was dying. "Hold still," she commanded, dropping to her knees beside him. Her hands found the wound, and immediately she felt the familiar burn of silver poison in his system. But she'd done this before now, had fought this battle and won. Light blazed from her palms, silver white and pure, driving back the poison that tried to corrupt her gift. The boy's wounds sealed themselves, the deadly silver traces dissolving under her power. Within moments he was whole again, staring at her with wonder. "Go," she told him. "Get back to the fight." But as she turned to find the next wounded warrior, strong hands seized her shoulders. Marcus stood behind her, his pale eyes blazing with something that might have been triumph. "Perfect," he said, and his voice carried a satisfaction that made her skin crawl. "Absolutely perfect." Before she could ask what he meant, he dragged her toward a section of the courtyard where more wounded were being carried. But these weren't random casualties of battle, they were arranged in neat rows, as if someone had been gathering them deliberately. "Heal them," Marcus commanded. "All of them. Show these hunters what real power looks like." Understanding crashed over her like ice water. "You planned this. You knew they were coming." Marcus's smile was colder than winter. "I knew they would come eventually. I simply encouraged them to attack tonight when you could witness firsthand what we're fighting against." His grip tightened on her shoulders. "And when you could prove to everyone, including yourself, that you're far too valuable to waste on moral qualms." "You used your own people as bait," Lyra breathed, horror making her voice shake. "You let them get hurt just to manipulate me." "I let them serve their pack in the most effective way possible," Marcus corrected. "Every warrior here knew the risks when they took up arms. But you can ensure their sacrifices aren't in vain." Around them, the battle raged on, but Lyra was suddenly aware of how many eyes were on her. Warriors fighting desperately, yes, but also watching to see if she would heal their fallen comrades. Hunters pressing their attack but also studying her with calculating gazes, as if trying to understand what she was, what she could do. "Heal them now," Marcus said, his voice taking on a harder edge, "or watch them die while you debate philosophy." The wounded warriors were suffering. She could see the silver poison working through their systems, could hear their labored breathing as their bodies fought battles they couldn't win alone. Whatever Marcus's manipulations, these people were dying, and she was the only one who could save them. She knelt beside the nearest warrior and placed her hands on his wounds. The healing was harder this time, fighting not just the poison but her own rage at being manipulated. Her light flared brighter than it ever had before, visible even in the chaos of battle, and she moved from warrior to warrior with desperate efficiency. But as she worked, she became aware of something else. The hunters weren't just attacking randomly anymore. They were watching her, studying her healing technique with interest that chilled her to the bone. One of them, larger than the rest with scars crisscrossing his hybrid face, pointed directly at her and barked something in a language she didn't understand. Immediately, several other hunters began fighting their way toward her position. "They want her alive," Marcus observed with academic interest, as if discussing a mildly fascinating specimen. "How very interesting. I wonder what they plan to do with a healer who can neutralize their greatest weapon." Fear shot through Lyra like lightning. "What are you talking about? Think, child. You've just demonstrated that wolfsbane poisoning means nothing to your gift. What do you suppose happens when word of that reaches the enemy leadership?" Marcus's eyes glittered with malice. Do you imagine they'll simply accept defeat? Or do you think they might find other uses for someone with your abilities? The largest hunter was almost through the pack's defenses now, cutting down anyone who stood between him and Lyra with ruthless efficiency. She could see the hunger in his sickly yellow eyes, could read his intentions in every deliberate movement. They didn't want to kill her. They wanted to take her. "Help me," she gasped, but when she looked around, Marcus was gone, vanished into the chaos as if he'd never been there at all. The hunter lunged forward, silver claws extended toward her throat. Lyra threw herself backward, but she knew she wasn't fast enough, knew those claws would find their mark. A black blur intercepted the hunter mid-leap. Kieran in wolf form crashed into the creature with bone-shattering force, sending them both tumbling across the blood-slicked stones. They rolled, snarling and clawing, but even as Lyra watched in terrified fascination, she could see that the hunter was stronger than any human had a right to be. Silver claws raked across Kieran's ribs, opening wounds that should have healed instantly but continued to bleed. The hunter had been expecting werewolf opponents, had prepared for their strengths and weaknesses. As Kieran shifted back to human form to better fight with weapons, the hunter matched him move for move, strike for strike. "Behind you!" Lyra screamed as another hunter approached from Kieran's blind side. But even as Kieran spun to meet this new threat, Lyra realized with crystalline horror that the first hunter had used the distraction exactly as planned. He was moving again, not toward Kieran but toward her, and this time there was no one between them. She tried to run, but her legs felt like water. The hunter's claws reached for her, and in his eyes she saw not just hunger but recognition, as if he'd been looking for her specifically, as if her capture was the real goal of this entire attack. "The healer," he said in accented but perfectly understandable speech. "My master will be so pleased." Time seemed to slow as those silver claws descended toward her throat. She could hear Kieran roaring her name, could see him fighting desperately to reach her, but he was too far away, engaged with too many enemies. The claws were inches from her skin when light exploded from her body, not the controlled healing radiance she was used to, but raw power driven by terror and desperation. The hunter screamed as the light seared his flesh, stumbling backward with smoking wounds across his arms and face. But even as she marveled at this new manifestation of her gift, Lyra realized she'd made a terrible mistake. Every hunter in the courtyard had stopped fighting to stare at her, their yellow eyes wide with a hunger that had nothing to do with killing. They'd seen her power now, understood what she could do, what she could become in the right hands. And from the way they were looking at her, she knew with sick certainty that every one of them had just decided she was worth more than any victory in battle. The scarred hunter wiped blood from his burned face and smiled, an expression that was all teeth and malice. "Much better than we hoped," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet courtyard. "The stories didn't do you justice, little healer." "Stories?" Lyra's voice came out as a whisper. "Oh yes. We've been hearing about you for weeks now. The human girl who can heal the unhealable, who can neutralize our greatest weapons against the wolf packs." His smile widened. "My master has such plans for you." Around the courtyard, the pack warriors were beginning to understand what was happening. They thought this was a normal raid, a simple attack meant to weaken their defenses. But this was something else entirely, a targeted extraction, with her as the prize. Kieran appeared at her side, blood streaming from multiple wounds but his golden eyes blazing with protective fury. "You want her, you go through me." "Gladly," the scarred hunter replied. Then he raised his head and howled, not the sound of a wolf, but something darker, more twisted. It was answered immediately by howls from beyond the fortress walls, and Lyra's heart sank as she realized this wasn't the entire attacking force. This had been a probe, a test to confirm her abilities. The real attack was just beginning. "Run," Kieran said quietly, his voice steady despite the blood loss. "Get to the inner keep. Barricade yourself in. I'm not leaving you." You're not dying here either. His hands found her face, and she could see her own fear reflected in his golden eyes. Lyra, if they take you, if they get their hands on someone with your abilities, they'll turn me into a weapon against your people, she finished, understanding flooding through her with horrible clarity. He nodded grimly. A healer who can neutralize our defenses, who might be forced to heal their hunters instead of our warriors. They could use you to tip the balance of this war completely. The howls were getting closer now, and through the breach in the wall, Lyra could see shapes moving in the darkness beyond, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. This is what Marcus wanted, isn't it? She said with sudden, bitter understanding. He knew they would come for me. He wanted me to see what the stakes really are, wanted me to understand that I'm already part of this war whether I choose to be or not. Kieran's expression darkened. Marcus has his own agenda. Always has. But right now, that doesn't matter. What matters is keeping you safe. But even as he spoke, Lyra could see it in his eyes, the same calculation she'd seen in Marcus's face, the same weighing of costs and benefits that came with leadership in wartime. He loved her, she could see that now, could feel it in the way his hands trembled against her face. But he was also an Alpha King, and if her capture could destroy his pack. You'd kill me yourself rather than let them take me, she said with quiet certainty. He didn't deny it. Couldn't deny it, not when the truth was written so clearly in his golden eyes. If it came to that, he said quietly. If it was the only way to protect everyone else, yes. I would. And I'd hate myself for it every day for the rest of my life. It should have terrified her. Instead, she found herself oddly comforted by his honesty, by the pain she could see the admission cost him. It won't come to that, she said with more confidence than she felt. We'll find another way. But even as the words left her lips, the scarred hunter smiled again, revealing teeth that had been filed to sharp points. Too late for alternatives, little healer, he said, raising his clawed hand in some kind of signal. My master grows impatient, and we've learned not to keep him waiting. The howling outside stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence that was somehow worse than the battle noise had been. Then came the sound of footsteps, dozens of them, moving with the coordinated precision of a military force. Through the breach came more hunters than Lyra had imagined possible, and these weren't the half-wild creatures from the first wave. These moved with disciplined formation, carried weapons that gleamed with more than just silver, and their eyes held the cold intelligence of career soldiers rather than rabid beasts. At their head walked a figure that made even the scarred hunter step back with something approaching deference. Tall and lean, dressed in black leather that seemed to absorb the torchlight, this newcomer moved with fluid grace that spoke of absolute confidence in his own power. When he looked at Lyra, she felt as if ice water had been injected directly into her veins. So, he said, his voice cultured and soft but carrying easily across the courtyard, this is the famous healer who's been causing us so much trouble. His eyes weren't the sickly yellow of the other hunters. They were pale blue, almost colorless, and when they fixed on her face, Lyra felt as if he could see straight through to her soul. I am Commander Aldrich Voss, he continued, inclining his head with mocking courtesy. And you, my dear, are coming with us. It wasn't a request. And as his hunters began to close in from all sides, Lyra realized with horrible clarity that all of Marcus's manipulations, all of Kieran's protective instincts, all of her own moral struggles, had led to this moment. She was about to become exactly what everyone had feared, a weapon in the hands of those who would use her to destroy everything she'd come to care about. Chapter 6. The circle of hunters closed in with predatory patience, their movements coordinated like a pack bringing down prey. But these weren't mindless beasts, every step was calculated, every angle covered, cutting off any possible escape route with military precision. Commander Voss stood at the edge of the circle, his pale eyes never leaving Lyra's face. I must admit, I'm impressed by your resourcefulness, he said conversationally. The way you neutralized the wolfsbane poison earlier, quite ingenious. My researchers will be fascinated to study your techniques. Study? Kieran snarled, positioning himself between Lyra and the nearest hunter. Around the courtyard, the surviving pack members were forming a defensive ring, but they were vastly outnumbered now. Oh yes, Voss continued, as if Kieran hadn't spoken. We've learned so much about supernatural abilities in recent years. How to enhance them, redirect them, even transfer them under the right circumstances. His smile was winter cold. The applications for your gift are truly limitless, my dear. Horror crept up Lyra's spine like ice. You want to steal my abilities. Want? No, that's far too crude a word. We intend to study them, understand them, and ultimately replicate them for the greater good of humanity. Voss gestured to his hunters. These men were volunteers, you understand. Humans who underwent modification to better hunt the supernatural threats that plague our world. Think of what we could accomplish with healing abilities added to their enhancements. You've turned them into monsters, Lyra breathed. We've made them stronger. Faster. Better equipped to protect innocent humans from creatures that would prey upon them. His pale eyes hardened. Just as we'll make you better equipped to serve humanity's needs rather than wasting your gift on these animals. Kieran's growl rumbled deep in his chest, the sound promising violence. She's not going anywhere with you. I'm afraid that decision is no longer yours to make, Voss replied calmly. He raised his hand, and immediately his hunters tensed for action. You can surrender her peacefully and perhaps save some of your pack members' lives. Or you can fight us and watch them all die protecting something you cannot possibly keep. It was the same impossible choice Marcus had presented, wrapped in different words. Sacrifice herself for the sake of others, or let good people die for her freedom. But as Lyra looked around the courtyard at the faces of the pack members, Elena cowering behind an overturned cart, Gareth bleeding from fresh wounds but still standing ready to fight, even some of the children who'd hidden during the battle now peering out with wide, frightened eyes, she realized something had changed. These weren't strangers anymore. They weren't just Kieran's people or obligations she'd inherited by accident. They were her people now, her pack, her family in ways that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with choice. There's a third option, she said quietly. Voss raised an eyebrow. Oh. And what might that be? Instead of answering, Lyra stepped forward, putting herself directly between the hunters and the pack members. She could feel Kieran tense beside her, could sense his desperate desire to pull her back to safety, but she held her ground. You want my healing abilities? She called out, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. You want to know how my gift works, how to replicate it? Lyra, no, Kieran said urgently. Don't give them anything. Then let me show you, she continued, ignoring his warning. Her hands began to glow with soft golden light, the same healing radiance that had saved so many lives. Let me demonstrate exactly what my power can do. The hunters leaned forward eagerly, their yellow eyes fixed on her hands. Even Voss looked intrigued, his cold demeanor warming slightly with scientific curiosity. Fascinating, he murmured. The energy signature is unlike anything we've cataloged before. How do you channel it? Is it emotional? Physical? Some combination of. Lyra smiled, and there was nothing gentle about the expression. It's love, she said simply. Then she poured every ounce of power she possessed not into healing, but into its opposite. Light exploded from her body, not the warm gold of healing energy, but blazing silver-white radiance that seared the eyes and scorched the soul. The hunters closest to her screamed as the light touched them, their enhanced bodies unable to process energy that was designed to give life being used in ways that defied every natural law. Impossible, Voss breathed, but even he staggered backward as the light washed over him. Healing energy can't be weaponized. It's fundamentally incompatible with destructive intent. You're right, Lyra said through gritted teeth, her whole body shaking with the effort of maintaining the assault. It can't be weaponized. But it can be used to purge corruption, to cleanse poison, to burn away everything that doesn't belong. The light intensified, and now it wasn't just affecting the hunters, it was stripping away their enhancements, unraveling whatever modifications had been made to their bodies. They writhed on the ground as their hybrid forms destabilized, as their enhanced strength and speed bled away like water through a sieve. And you, Lyra said, her blazing eyes fixing on Voss, definitely don't belong here. The commander raised some kind of device, a talisman that gleamed with unnatural light of its own, and the assault of her power broke against it like waves against a seawall. But even protected by whatever dark magic he carried, she could see fear in his pale eyes for the first time. Remarkable, he said, though his voice was strained now. Absolutely remarkable. The potential applications are none of your concern, a new voice cut across the courtyard. Marcus Draven stepped through the chaos, moving with unhurried confidence despite the supernatural energies crackling through the air. In his hands was a weapon Lyra had never seen before, a staff topped with crystals that pulsed with the same silver-white light as her power. Marcus, Kieran snarled. Where the hell have you been? Preparing, Marcus replied calmly. He raised the staff, and immediately Lyra felt her power being drawn away from her, channeled into the crystals at its tip. Did you really think I would let such a valuable asset destroy herself in a moment of misguided heroism? Understanding crashed over her like a physical blow. You planned this. All of it. You let them attack, let them get close to taking me, just so you could demonstrate your true value to everyone present, Marcus finished. Including yourself. The staff pulsed brighter, and more of her energy flowed into it. Your little display just now proved something we've long suspected, your gift isn't just healing. It's pure life energy, capable of both creation and destruction depending on how it's directed. Voss was watching this exchange with renewed interest, his scientific curiosity overriding his tactical concerns. You're not working together, he observed. How delightfully chaotic. Two factions fighting over the same prize. Not fighting, Marcus corrected. Negotiating. The word sent ice through Lyra's veins. What are you talking about? Marcus's pale eyes fixed on hers with the same calculating coldness she'd seen before. You've proven tonight that you're too dangerous to be left to your own devices. Too powerful to be allowed to choose your own path. The question now is who can best direct that power toward productive ends. You're talking about selling me, she said with dawning horror. I'm talking about ensuring your abilities are used in the most effective way possible, Marcus replied. Commander Voss has offered quite reasonable terms for a consultation. You would spend time with his researchers, help them understand your gift, contribute to the advancement of human knowledge and capability. And in return? Kieran's voice was deadly quiet. In return, his forces withdraw from this territory. No more raids, no more systematic hunting of our kind. A chance for our people to rebuild, to recover from centuries of persecution. Marcus's expression didn't change. It's a fair trade. One life to save hundreds. Lyra felt the betrayal like a physical wound. All of Marcus's manipulations, all of his talk about pack survival and necessary sacrifices, had led to this moment, her sale to the enemy disguised as noble sacrifice. You bastard, Kieran breathed, his golden eyes blazing with fury. She's not a commodity to be traded. Isn't she? Marcus raised the staff higher, and Lyra gasped as more of her power was drawn away. What has she been since the moment she healed Gareth? What have any of us been treating her as except a weapon to be pointed at our problems? The accusation hit too close to home, and Lyra could see in Kieran's face that he knew it was at least partially true. They'd all been thinking of her in terms of what she could do for them, how her abilities could serve their needs. At least I never planned to hand her over to torturers, Kieran snarled. Researchers, Voss corrected mildly. Though I admit the distinction might seem academic from certain perspectives. Lyra looked around the courtyard, at the pack members watching in horrified fascination, at the hunters still writhing as their modifications unraveled, at Marcus holding a staff that was slowly draining away her power, at Kieran standing helpless in the face of political machinations beyond his control. And she realized that in all their scheming and planning and negotiating, they'd all forgotten one crucial detail. She still had a choice. No, she said quietly. The word fell into the chaos like a stone into still water, creating ripples of silence that spread outward until even the wounded hunters stopped moaning. No? Marcus raised an eyebrow. I'm afraid it's not that simple, child. The arrangements have already been. No, Lyra repeated, louder this time. She could feel her power responding to her will, fighting against the staff's pull. I'm not going with him. I'm not staying here to be your weapon. And I'm definitely not being traded like livestock between two groups of people who see me as a thing instead of a person. The staff in Marcus's hands began to crack as her energy surged back into her body. You don't understand the larger picture. I understand perfectly, Lyra said, and now her voice carried a resonance that made the stones themselves seem to tremble. You all want to use me. Him to advance human supremacy, you to save your pack, even Kieran to ease his conscience about the war. But none of you have bothered to ask what I want. And what do you want? Voss asked, genuine curiosity in his pale eyes. Lyra looked at each of them in turn, the commander who would make her a tool of oppression, the advisor who would trade her freedom for political advantage, the alpha who loved her but would still sacrifice her if necessary. I want to choose my own path, she said simply. I want to use my gift to help people, all people, human and werewolf alike, without being anyone's weapon or anyone's bargaining chip. She took a step forward, and power radiated from her like heat from a forge. I want to heal the wounds between your peoples instead of widening them. I want to find a way for humans and werewolves to coexist instead of destroying each other. Impossible, Marcus scoffed. The hatred runs too deep, the differences too vast. Nothing is impossible, Lyra said, and her eyes blazed with silver fire. I can heal wolfsbane poisoning, remember? I can purge supernatural modifications. I can channel life energy itself. She smiled, and it was radiant with possibility. Don't you think I might be able to heal hatred too? The staff in Marcus's hands shattered completely, releasing all the energy he'd stolen back to her in a rush that made her gasp. Around the courtyard, her power washed over everyone present, pack member and hunter alike, and for just a moment, she felt their deepest desires, their hidden fears, their secret dreams. They weren't so different, she realized. Humans and werewolves, they all wanted the same basic things, safety for their children, homes that couldn't be taken away, the chance to live without constant fear. It was the fear that divided them, the fear that fed the hatred, the fear that made monsters of them all. But fear could be healed, just like any other wound. I'll make you both a deal, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the courtyard. I'll work with both your people. I'll help the werewolves learn to control their abilities better, to heal their wounded without creating dependence. And I'll help the humans understand that strength doesn't have to come from becoming monsters themselves. In exchange for what? Voss asked warily. Peace, Lyra said simply. Real peace, not just a cessation of hostilities. A chance to build something better than endless war. Marcus laughed bitterly. You're a naive child if you think it's that simple. Maybe, Lyra admitted. But I'd rather be a naive idealist than a cynical realist who's given up on the possibility of something better. She turned to look at Kieran, and her heart clenched at the expression in his golden eyes, hope and fear and love all tangled together in a way that made her want to weep. "Will you help me?" she asked quietly. "Will you trust me to find a better way?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. She could see the struggle in his face, the war between his protective instincts and his faith in her abilities, between his duty as an alpha and his feelings as a man. Finally, slowly, he nodded. "Against my better judgment and probably against all reason, yes. I'll help you." Voss was watching this exchange with calculating eyes. "And if your idealistic experiment fails? If the old hatreds prove too strong for even your remarkable abilities?" Lyra met his gaze steadily. "Then I'll accept the consequences of my choice. But I won't let anyone else make that choice for me." The commander studied her for a long moment, then surprised everyone by laughing, a sound with no warmth but a certain grudging respect. "Very well," he said, raising his hand to signal his hunters. "We withdraw for now. But understand this, healer, the world is not as forgiving as your protected mountain fortress. When reality crashes against your idealism, we'll be waiting." As the hunters began to retreat, moving with disciplined precision despite their injuries, Voss paused at the breach in the wall. "One more thing," he called back. "Your friend Marcus was right about one thing: you are too dangerous to be left entirely to your own devices. There are forces in this world that would use your abilities for purposes that would make our little disagreement seem like a pleasant philosophical debate." His pale eyes fixed on hers with something that might have been warning. "Watch yourself, healer. Not everyone who comes seeking your help will have such moderate intentions." Then he was gone, taking his hunters with him, leaving behind only the scent of blood and the echo of possibilities both bright and terrible. In the silence that followed, Lyra looked around at the faces of the people she'd chosen to call family, pack members who'd fought beside her, a lover who'd offered her partnership despite the risks, even Marcus who'd tried to trade her freedom for his people's survival. They were all staring at her with expressions she couldn't quite read: awe, fear, hope, uncertainty, all mixed together in a cocktail of emotions that matched her own. "So," she said with a shaky laugh that held the edge of hysteria, "who wants to help me save the world?" But even as nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd, even as Kieran's arms came around her in an embrace that promised protection and partnership in equal measure, Lyra couldn't shake the echo of Voss's warning. She'd chosen her path, claimed her power, rejected the roles others would have forced upon her. But in doing so, she'd also painted a target on her back that would be visible to every faction, every power broker, every would-be world changer who heard her story. The war between humans and werewolves might be over, at least in this small corner of the world. But her real trials, she suspected, were just beginning. Epilogue. 6 months later. The morning sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and amber as Lyra stood on the battlements of Shadowmere, watching the valley below come alive with activity. What had once been empty wilderness now bustled with construction, buildings rising from cleared ground, roads being carved through the forest, the framework of something unprecedented taking shape. "The human delegation arrives today," Kieran said, joining her at the wall. His arms settled around her waist with the comfortable familiarity of a partnership forged in crisis and tempered by time. "Are you ready for this?" Lyra leaned into his warmth, drawing strength from his presence as she'd learned to do over the past months. "As ready as anyone can be for making history, I suppose." Below them, the settlement that had no official name yet, though some had taken to calling it Haven, spread across the valley floor. Humans and werewolves worked side by side on the construction projects, their initial wariness gradually giving way to grudging respect and, in some cases, genuine friendship. It hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks, conflicts, moments when the old hatred threatened to tear apart everything they were trying to build. But slowly, carefully, with more patience than Lyra had known she possessed, they'd made progress. "The healing circles are working better than we expected," she said, nodding toward a group gathered around one of the permanent stone circles they'd constructed throughout the settlement. Elena managed to close a silver wound yesterday without any help from me. Kieran's eyebrows rose. Elena? But she's completely human. That's what makes it so remarkable. Turns out healing energy isn't limited to those with supernatural blood, it just requires a different kind of training. Lyra smiled at the memory of the quiet servant's amazement when golden light had first flickered from her palms. We've got 12 humans and 8 werewolves who can perform basic healing now. It's not enough for the really serious cases, but for everyday injuries. It changes everything, Kieran finished. Again. His tone held a mixture of pride and concern that had become familiar over the months. Every breakthrough brought new possibilities, but also new dangers. Word of their success was spreading beyond the mountain territories, drawing attention they weren't sure they wanted. Any word from the scouts? Lyra asked, though she dreaded the answer. Kieran's expression darkened. 3 more settlements have been attacked in the past month. The pattern is always the same, humans and werewolves working together, then sudden strikes by unknown forces. No survivors left to tell what happened. The shadow that had been hanging over their success grew a little darker. Someone, or some group, didn't want humans and werewolves learning to coexist. Someone with resources, organization, and a ruthlessness that made Commander Voss look moderate by comparison. Any ideas who's behind it? Marcus has theories. Kieran's voice carried the careful neutrality he used whenever discussing his former advisor. Most of them involve ancient supernatural factions that have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. The relationship between Kieran and Marcus remained strained, though the older man had grudgingly accepted his reduced role in the pack hierarchy. His attempted betrayal had cost him most of his political influence, but his knowledge of supernatural politics made him too valuable to exile completely. What kind of factions? The kind that view humans and werewolves as resources to be managed rather than people with the right to choose their own destinies. Kieran's arm tightened around her. The kind that would see you as either a threat to be eliminated or a prize to be claimed. Before Lyra could respond, a horn sounded from the valley below, the signal that the expected delegation had been spotted on the mountain road. She straightened, pushing aside her fears to focus on the immediate challenge. Time to make history, she murmured. The human delegation was larger than expected, nearly 50 people including diplomats, scholars, healers, and what looked suspiciously like bodyguards. At their head rode a woman Lyra recognized from the detailed briefings Marcus had insisted on preparing. Ambassador Catherine Sterling was everything the reports had suggested: elegant, intelligent, and carrying herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to navigating treacherous political waters. But as she dismounted in the settlement's central square, her eyes held a wariness that spoke of recent hard lessons about the supernatural world. "Lady Lyra," she said, offering a respectful bow that somehow managed to convey both diplomatic courtesy and genuine respect. "Your reputation precedes you, though I confess reality is somewhat different than I expected." "Different how?" Lyra asked, accepting the woman's offered hand. "Younger. More." Sterling paused, clearly searching for the right word. "More human, I suppose. The stories we've heard paint you as something between a saint and a force of nature." "I'm just someone who got tired of watching people die for stupid reasons," Lyra replied honestly. "Though I'll admit the force of nature part isn't entirely inaccurate anymore." As if to demonstrate her point, she let a flicker of silver light dance across her fingertips. The effect on the human delegation was immediate. Some stepped back in alarm, others leaned forward in fascination, all of them suddenly very aware that they were in the presence of something beyond their normal experience. "Remarkable," breathed one of the scholars, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles. "The energy signature is unlike anything in our catalogs." "How do you channel it? Is it emotional? Spiritual? Some form of focused willpower?" "All of the above and none of them," Lyra said with a smile that had become practiced over months of similar questions. It's like asking someone how they love or how they breathe. It's not really something that can be broken down into component parts. Sterling was watching this exchange with keen interest. Our healers are particularly eager to observe your techniques. We've had mixed results trying to replicate the reports we've received. Mixed results can be dangerous when you're dealing with life energy, Lyra said seriously. I hope no one was seriously injured. 3 healers suffered what our physicians called spiritual burnout. They recovered, but... Sterling's expression tightened. Let's just say the Crown is very interested in ensuring proper training protocols before any large-scale implementation. The Crown. Lyra had known this day would come when her little experiment in peace would attract the attention of major political powers. The question was whether that attention would prove helpful or catastrophic. I'd be happy to work with your healers, she said carefully. But I should warn you, this isn't something that can be weaponized or mass-produced. It requires a fundamental shift in how someone views the relationship between different forms of life. You mean it requires them to see werewolves as people rather than monsters, Sterling said bluntly. Among other things, yes. The ambassador studied her for a long moment, then glanced around the bustling settlement where humans and werewolves continued their work with barely a pause for the new arrivals. Your Majesty was quite specific in her instructions, Sterling said finally. The Crown recognizes the strategic value of improved human-werewolf relations, particularly given recent complications in our eastern territories. Complications? Vampire incursions. Fey border disputes. Reports of something the local folklore calls shadow walkers emerging from the deep forests. Sterling's tone was matter-of-fact, but Lyra could see the strain around her eyes. It seems the supernatural world is becoming less willing to remain hidden. The Crown believes that alliances with reasonable supernatural communities might be preferable to facing these threats alone. Lyra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. The warnings from Voss and Marcus were proving prophetic. Their small success was attracting attention from forces far more dangerous than human werewolf prejudice. I see. And what exactly does the Crown propose? A formal treaty. Recognition of werewolf territories in exchange for mutual defense agreements. Shared resources and knowledge. And, if possible, training programs to help human healers develop abilities similar to yours. It was more than Lyra had dared hope for, and exactly what she'd feared. Official recognition would legitimize everything they'd built here, provide protection and resources that could help them expand their work. It would also make them a target for every faction that preferred the old ways, every power structure that depended on keeping humans and supernatural creatures divided. I'll need to discuss this with the pack leadership, Lyra said diplomatically. And with our other allied communities. Other communities? Sterling's eyebrows rose. How many settlements like this one exist? 7 confirmed, with 3 more in development. Lyra couldn't keep the pride from her voice. It turns out there were a lot of humans and werewolves who were tired of the war. The number clearly surprised Sterling, and Lyra could see her mental calculations shifting. This wasn't a curious local phenomenon anymore, it was a movement, with implications that reached far beyond a single mountain valley. The Crown will want to know about those other communities as well, Sterling said carefully. For the treaty to be effective, it would need to cover all human werewolf cooperative territories. Which would make them all targets if the treaty fails, Kieran observed, joining the conversation for the first time since the formal introductions. Sterling turned to him with interest. You must be Lord Blackthorne. Your reputation also precedes you, though in rather different circles. I prefer to think of it as a colorful past, Kieran replied with a diplomatic smile that didn't quite reach his golden eyes. The question is whether your Crown is prepared for the complications that come with openly allying with our kind. What sort of complications? The kind that attack mixed settlements in the night and leave no survivors, Marcus said, emerging from the crowd with his usual impeccable timing. The kind that view human werewolf cooperation as an existential threat to their own power structures. Sterling's gaze sharpened as she took in Marcus's appearance, the expensive clothes, the predator's grace, the cold intelligence in his pale eyes. And you would be? Marcus Draven. Political advisor and, regrettably, expert on the more unpleasant aspects of supernatural politics. He offered a bow that managed to convey both respect and subtle mockery. I take it Her Majesty's advisors didn't mention the ongoing attacks on cooperative settlements? They mentioned certain security concerns. Sterling's diplomatic training was showing, but Lyra could see the worry beneath it. Are you saying there's organized opposition to these peace efforts? I'm saying there are forces in this world that have spent centuries profiting from the conflict between humans and supernatural creatures, Marcus replied bluntly. Arms dealers who sell silver weapons to humans and blessed steel to werewolves. Political factions that maintain power by keeping their populations afraid of external threats. Ancient supernatural entities that view both humans and werewolves as livestock to be managed. The scholar with the wire-rimmed spectacles had gone pale. Surely you're exaggerating. The scale of conspiracy you're describing is entirely consistent with recent intelligence reports. Sterling cut him off, her expression grim. Though we weren't certain of the connection to these settlement attacks. She turned back to Lyra, and there was something new in her eyes, not just diplomatic calculation, but genuine concern for a fellow person facing impossible choices. Lady Lyra, I came here prepared to negotiate a simple alliance. But if you're facing the kind of organized opposition Lord Draven describes, then perhaps we should be discussing something more comprehensive. Military support. Intelligence sharing. Coordinated defensive strategies. It was the offer Lyra had both hoped for and dreaded. Real support from a major human power, the kind of backing that could help them survive whatever was coming. It was also the final step away from the simple life she'd once dreamed of, the last chance to remain just a healer rather than a political figure whose choices would shape the fate of multiple species. What would you need from us in return? She asked quietly. Honesty. About your capabilities, your limitations, your long-term goals. Sterling paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. And access to your healing techniques for our military healers. If we're going to face supernatural threats together, we need every advantage we can get. There it was, the price of protection, the cost of alliance. They wanted her to help create more healers, more people with abilities that could be turned toward war as easily as peace. But as she looked around the settlement, at the humans and werewolves who'd found hope in cooperation rather than conflict, at the children playing together without regard for species, at the wounded who'd been healed and the enemies who'd become friends, she realized the choice had been made long ago. All right, she said, her voice carrying across the square with quiet authority. But we do this my way. No weaponizing the healing arts. No forced conscription. No turning people into tools for war. Agreed, Sterling said immediately. Though I should warn you, others may not be so scrupulous about such limitations. Then we'll deal with those others when we have to, Lyra replied. She looked up at Kieran, seeing her own resolve reflected in his golden eyes, then at Marcus who nodded grimly, and finally at the mixed crowd of humans and werewolves who'd become her people. Together. As the sun climbed higher over the mountains, painting the settlement in warm light that seemed to promise better days ahead, Lyra felt the weight of the future settling on her shoulders. There would be new challenges, greater dangers, harder choices. But there would also be hope. The kind of hope that came from proving impossible things were possible, from turning enemies into allies, from choosing love over fear even when fear seemed more practical. She'd started this journey as a slave on an auction block, convinced her only value lay in what others could use her for. Now she stood as a leader, a healer, a bridge between worlds, surrounded by people who'd chosen to follow her vision of something better. It wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of something far greater than she'd ever imagined possible. And as Kieran's hand found hers, warm and steady and full of promise, Lyra smiled and stepped forward into whatever came next. Together, they would heal the world. Or die trying. Either way, it would be their choice. The end.